After reading last year's story, Roger, a goat story for Christmas time, it was brought to my attention that the tradition is actually for a Christmas ghost story, not a goat story. So I apologize. And to make it up to you, I found a reportedly true, terrifying ghost story from northeast Minneapolis. I say reportedly true because this story was published in the Minneapolis Tribune paper on November 6, 1899. At the time, it was not unheard of for a newspaper to include some filler stories that were either just grossly exaggerated or fully made up. This story takes place in what was then a long-neglected cemetery called Maple Hill. The cemetery had been removed in the early 1900s and the land has since been developed. Today, the only remnants of the old cemetery exist in a small neighborhood park called Beltrami Park. I visited it this fall and found it a very nice, well-maintained park, with a few old gravestones left on site. I'm relieved to report that we were not visited by any ghosts during our visit. A link to the Minneapolis Star Tribune blog post talking about the park, as well as the original story, will be posted in the description of this video. Now here's my Christmas ghost story for 2020. Terror at Maple Hill Cemetery. "Help! Help! The ghost will get me!" shrieked Ida Olson last evening as she rushed up to a pedestrian who was walking along Central Avenue near the abandoned Maple Hill Cemetery in northeast Minneapolis. Ida Olson, who is a domestic, was frightened so badly that it was nearly impossible for her to talk in a coherent manner, and for a time it was feared that she had been driven insane by fright. She declared that while walking past the old cemetery with her sweetheart, Ollie Johnson, a white apparition had arisen from one of the neglected graves, and with an unearthly yell, he pursued them. During the pursuit, she and Ollie had been separated. She was sure that what she had seen was a ghost, and she declared with equal firmness that it was an evil-looking ghost with demonic horns, for she had seen the horns on his head. She also noted that he wore a long white beard. Several times while telling her story, she became hysterical, and it was only with great difficulty that she could be induced to continue. John Adams, who was employed by the Columbia Heights Mills, was the man whom she had accosted on the street, and at once he took Ida into a nearby drugstore where her story was related to others. At first it was thought that she had been drinking, but there was not the slightest smell of liquor on her breath, and she was very badly frightened. While she was talking, her sweetheart Ollie entered the place and cried with joy at seeing her safe and sound. Ollie, who is a laboring man and fairly intelligent-looking young fellow, told a story that was quite similar to that related by Ida. Several persons were in the drugstore at the time, and they at once formed a party and paid a visit to the old cemetery. As the abiding place of the dead was approached, a few of the men in the party lost their courage and started to lag behind. Ida, on the contrary, was fairly brave now that there were other persons nearby, and she led the party to the place where she said the ghost had appeared. The spot from which the figure had arisen proved to be a slight depression on a mound, and the crushed down leaves and dead grass showed that a body of some sort had recently lain there. The adventure was becoming serious, and a few members of the party fled upon this discovery. An extended search of the area was made, but no trace of a ghost or anything looking like one could be found. Just as the party was about to give up and return to Central Avenue, a gasp of horror burst from the lips of Ole, and he sank to the ground in a heap. A short distance away, only just visible in the dim light, was a white figure with demonic-looking horns and a long white beard, just as Miss Olson had described. As the party looked on, the apparition let out an unearthly yell, followed by a silence that was painful in its intensity. For a moment, no one dared to move or speak, until finally one of the more adventuresome members of the party started in the direction of the ghost, with a revolver in hand. "Speak or I'll shoot!" he called as he tried to scare the apparition. There was no response, and again he repeated his command. This time the object moved a trifle and seemed to advance towards the party. As the man with the gun was about to fire, the apparition let out a bellowing "Bah!" Then a large white goat with a beautiful pair of horns and a magnificent bunch of gray whiskers walked up to the men and began nosing around as if expecting to be fed. The reaction was too much for the party, and the various persons laughed until they cried. With the mystery solved, the party was disbanded. Ida and Ole went home to recover from their ordeal. As for the goat, it was later learned that it had been pastured in the old cemetery, and he has been in the habit of sleeping around any old place and approaching passers-by and asking for something to eat. It's said that if you walk through the land that once housed the old cemetery late at night, you may still hear the bleating of that old goat. The end, and Merry Christmas.